Hello, everybody. My name is Frank DeLise, Senior Product Manager at Autodesk. Today I'm going to show you a little bit about getting Fbx from Max and Maya into the UDK. So I'm going to walk you through. I have two classes. I'm doing one today is kind of introductory of how to get Fbx content out of Max and Maya. And tomorrow is a more advanced session, so if you can come tomorrow too, it'd be cool. So I'm doing some characters and vehicles and weapons and a lot of fun content. So to start, what is Fbx? So Fbx is interchange format. It's a really powerful format that allows, internally even allows us to go from tool to tool, from Max to Maya to Sautomage. But it's also an amazing interop tool between our tools and game engines. So we have a really great relationship with Epic that we're working together on getting Fbx content, that import process of getting Fbx content into the engine to be really tightly integrated and support a lot of key features of the UDK. So I'm going to walk through kind of some of the basics of getting content over, what is supported with Fbx, and kind of go from basic statics to skeletal meshes and animations and show you a bit of steps along the way. So I'm actually going to be going between Maya 2012 and Max 2012. So I'll show you the tool in both products. So to start, I've got Maya 2012 up here. And I'm going to start with some of the most basic form of assets to start, which is just getting a static mesh. Now, if you're using UDK, you probably want to know a little bit more about types of formats that are in there. And there's basically two major mesh formats, which is the static mesh and the skeletal mesh. And a static mesh is mainly used for building, static geometry, something that's not really going to move around or have any animation with. And a skeletal mesh is a mesh with bones, skinning, and that's usually something for weapons or characters or something animated within the scene. I'm going to walk you through, again, both of those. So I'm going to start by bringing in some assets into the UDK, and I'm going to bring them into Maya first. So in Maya, I'm actually going to load up here a scene of a simple test building to give you an idea. So basically, we've modeled this building, and it's got some basic textures on it, and I can orbit around here, and it's something I want to bring into the UDK and place around in the UDK level editor. So basically, right now, it's made up of a bunch of different pieces. It's got its own materials on each of the pieces. And I want to bring this in as a static geometry into the UDK editor. So obviously I can start by just going File, Export, and I can start exporting this object out. And I can export it as an Fbx. I'll set it to, I'm going to bring this up here. Actually, it looks like, let me just make sure this is loaded here. Why is that showing up? All right, give me a second here. For some reason it didn't load. I got 2012 loaded here. Just make sure Fbx is loaded first. Okay, so if Fbx isn't loaded, there's a way to load or auto-load Fbx in general here to get on the export process. So if I go to Export All, I should get an Fbx export now. So now it says Fbx Export. Go to Export, and I'm going to label this building, let's see, Building B Test. Test. And when you're presented with a bunch of different options for Fbx in general, you can export the smoothing groups, any selection sets that are in the file. So you got basically geometry, animation, cameras, lights. You can basically export almost everything out of Maya into this Fbx format. And what's actually great about the Fbx format is it knows how to interpolate this between even Max and Maya. So if you bring this content into Max, it'll actually bring it over. Lights will come over as lights, and geometry will come over as geometry. So it really understands both packages really, really well. But in this case, I'm going to bring over just basic geometry with smoothing groups and a basic polygon mesh. Now, when I go back to the UDK, so I'm going to launch the UDK here, and then bring that asset in. So UDK has an Fbx importer, and it can import both static meshes, skeletal meshes, animation, So I'm going to start by bringing in this static mesh. So if you go into the content browser, so if you go to this top little square up here, bring up the content browser, you can do an import. And I can do the import. I'm going to go back to my test file here, go to my building B export, and it's building B test, we call it. Now when you import, it's going to ask you what package you want it in, so I can call this building test. What's the name of the static mesh that I'm going to bring over? It's going to be building test B. And you're presented with a bunch of options. How do you want to bring this mesh over? Do you want to bring it over as a static mesh? Yes. Do I want to import any LODs? I'll go into that. Any morph targets, any animation. But one of the key options here is I can combine the meshes, which is a really nice tool. So if I want to bring in a static mesh that I want to retain all the different pieces when I originally built it, I can keep that in Maya or in Max as separate pieces, but when I import it, I can bring it out as one whole. That's a nice way to actually do the combo automatically, so I'm not left with a bunch of different pieces when I import. The other thing that's important when you bring in a static is that the pivot point of these objects is always very important, because that's how you're going to place it in the level. So you want to put the pivot point of the object at a point where that's going to be where you want it to touch the ground, or you want to intersect with another object. Because when you go place it, it's going to use the pivot point as the connection point to wherever you're putting it. So if you want to do a little bit of foliage, you want it to be on the ground a little bit, you can lift your pivot point up a tiny bit, so when you place it, boop, the roots go into the ground a little bit, for example. So the pivot point's an important part. So I'm going to bring over the mesh. I'm going to turn this off for a second, and I'll show you that in a bit. So I'm going to bring over as combined mesh and say OK. So right now it's going to import that FBX file as an Unreal static mesh asset. So it brings up my static mesh object, and it's got a default material on it. I can go in here and now start creating materials and applying textures and do what I want to do. But if you click on this static mesh, it will bring up the mesh itself. I can rotate around it and check it out. Looks pretty good, no major problems with it. I can look at collision if it has any, so there's like a little collision option here. If I click it, you'll see that nothing is going to show up because I didn't create any kind of collision for this object. And I'll show you what that means in a minute. So if I take this object now and just place it on the ground here, so I can just click and drag it here and zoom out here a bit. It dropped it exactly on top of the ground because my pivot point is at the base of the object, and now I can actually spawn in this level. So I'll do play from here. So you can see I have this geometry in here now, and I can walk up to the object, but I'll go right through it because I don't have any collision mesh on the object at all. So one of the cool things you can do here is back in Maya, for example, you can, well, actually I'll start with UDK. So in this static mesh object itself, you can actually go in here and say collision and create a collision for this object. So if you want to create a collision for it, you can actually generate one. But you can get more and more detailed on the collision mesh, but it's never going to be exactly the way you want it. It creates an automatic generated collision mesh, and it's okay. It will allow you to create basic collision meshes, and you can go higher and higher points on this collision, but it's never going to get that sidewalk just right and a door entrance just right. So you want to be able to build that collision mesh in Maya. So I'll show you real quick what happens here back in the UDK. Now they've added a collision mesh. I can go back here and play. And now I think I'll be able to hit, I'm running into a collision mesh. So I can't actually walk through this object anymore. I'm bouncing off a wall here because it's going off that collision. And in fact, if I type show collision, I should be able to see it in the world here. I can see that purple box around the object of that collision mesh. So I can quickly see what I've created. But back in Maya, what you can do is I've actually created a collision mesh for it. And I'll show you what you have to do here. So I'm going to go open another scene here with the collision. And basically you'll notice the main difference, actually let's do new, I just imported it here, hold on. Let's bring it back here with collision. Okay, so basically you'll notice that there's actually another set of objects in here now called UCX. So if you label the object, label the same name object with UCX underscore, very important. The editor, the Fbx exporter will recognize that. It's just a regular object. But when you bring it into the UDK, it's going to say, oh, it's got UCX underscore as a prefix. let me make that a custom collision mesh for what object, the suffix. So if it's UCX underscore building base, B base, it's going to make that the custom collision mesh for that object. So it allows you to create these custom collision meshes for individual objects. That gives you much more control over the collision mesh. So if I export this now with that UCX file, bcol, I'll just call it whatever, and then import that as bcol. Let's see, and say, okay, I'm going to do all the same stuff. I'm going to combine meshes, okay to all. So I've created just another static mesh for this object. And if I look at this object now, it should have a collision mesh. So now if you look at it now, it has this really tight collision mesh on it where these lines are really intersecting the objects very closely and accurately. It's because I built that inside of Maya, and it'll recognize that as a collision mesh because I called it UCX underscore. So that's a really important process if you want to create custom collisions. So the other thing too is you can do other things. Like for example, the object that I did place, if the object doesn't have a crazy amount of detail, you can get away with using the object itself as the collision mesh. So if you double click on that static mesh, you'll actually see an option in here that says use simple box collision. If we turn that off, we'll actually use the geometry as a collision mesh. Right, so now if I spawn in here again, you'll actually have detailed collision mesh on it to the actual object itself. So now I can see that it's using the object itself as the collision mesh. Actually, I'm still using the old one because I didn't delete the, let me just show you here. If I got to remove the collision that's on it, so I'll say remove collision, so now it's got no collision on it. Actually, it was this building. Remove collision, so use no collision on it, and then spawn there again. So now it's actually using, oh, it should be using it. What did I miss here? B test. Use simple line. Yep, I'll turn that off. Okay, play from here, and then I should be using this. So now I'm using the geometry itself as a collision mesh. So I'll hit the curb, jump over the curb, I hit the wall perfectly. So you can use the geometry itself as a collision mesh, but the more complicated the geometry gets, the slower it's going to get. You don't want to use too heavy stuff. But if it's crates and stuff like that, and you don't want to create a whole collision mesh for it, you can use that option. It's a pretty good option for a lot of things. It gives you a really nice collision mesh for objects. The other one you can do is when you import the object itself, I'm going to import again. I'm going to use the building test file that I initially imported. I'm going to import this object again as building test 2, but this time another really cool option is you can say import the materials and textures from that Fbx file. So if I do import materials and textures, this will take a little longer, but what it will do is import the geometry, but then it will also create the materials that you have set up inside of Maya. So if you apply a material to an object and then set up some textures for diffuse and spec and normal, it'll actually recreate the material and find all the texture references and re-import those textures as well, and then apply it to the object. So it saves a ton of steps if you want to just get the object up and running quickly. And it creates a material. It's not going to have all the fancy stuff you want to do in UDK, like if you want to do multiplies and add some color and do some other stuff. But it'll create a initial layout of the material and the hookups for the diffuse and spec and normal and stuff like that. So it definitely saves a lot of time. Now what is important is it will only bring over, so for example, if you have an object that's got multiple materials on it or has like let's say I have one object that has a material on the top and a different material on the side. You have to have a material applied to each of those pieces. If you don't have a material applied, it won't import that second material ID. So in Max's case, it's material IDs. It'll only bring over the material IDs that are associated, that have a material on it. If it has no material on it, it will just ignore them, and you'll get only one. So it's important to know that when you do that, that you want to make sure there's a material applied to it. So here you can see that it imported actually all the textures that were applied to that object. It created bring the normal map, and it created a material. And now that static mesh has an actual texture on it. So if I bring it over here, drag it on here, you can see that now that object brought over its materials and textures and set up everything for me. So the Fbx is pretty powerful in that way that you can get stuff running pretty quickly by doing that. Okay, another neat trick to show you here in Maya is that I'm going to bring over another one of these files again here. I'll bring over no collision and show you something else that's pretty cool. So here I have got this building again. This time what I want to do is I wanted to create I'm just going to combine them here in Maya and create an LOD. So I'm going to go Mesh, and I'm going to combine them all together to one object. And I'm going to delete history, so I just have my one object. I'm going to duplicate it, so I've duplicated the geometry. So I've got two of the same objects on top of each other. And I'm going to go here and I'm actually going to reduce the polygon count of that object quite a bit. All right, so now I've got two objects, high-res and low-res geometry for this object. Now the cool thing is you can actually set here in Maya, I can actually go in here and select both these objects and go to Edit, Level of Detail, and group them together as a level of detail. And basically as I zoom out, it gets low-res, and I zoom in, it gets high-res. Right, so you can actually set up high-res and low-res LODs for geometry. And what's nice is that Fbx will recognize that. Obviously it recognizes it, but also the Unreal recognizes it, which is great, because now you can set up your levels of detail directly in the Fbx file itself. So now I can say export again, and I'll say test LOD. And now when I go over to the UDK, I'll import it again. I'll also import it quickly without the material this time. I'll do test LOD, but now I'll just say import mesh LODs as well, and say OK. And now we'll actually bring in both meshes with the LOD settings automatically set up for you. Whatever you set up in Maya, it will do. It'll bring it over. So if I go here and set this new static mesh here, I call it test LOD. So actually it should transfer between the low res and high res. So I actually go in here, you can actually see it even easier. It's actually too good. But you can see it actually starts getting a little chunkier as it gets in the distance. So you can actually set LODs for high res. And here you can see it's nice and crisp and clean. And as you zoom out, it gets lower range. So it's cool that you can actually bring in the LODs directly from Maya directly into the UDK. Anybody have any questions so far? No? Well, cool. So one more thing I'm going to do just real quickly is just show you what this looks like laid out a bit more. So I'm going to open up the quick test. So again, this is kind of, I'm starting to lay out this level here with a bunch of these objects and assets from Maya here, for example. But if I wanted to create some geometry real quickly that's got higher scales, again, what's nice about keeping those separate pieces is that, let's get rid of this one and bring up a new one here, is that you can, by keeping the separate pieces, you can make buildings much more modular, but when you bring them in, they could be one asset. So it's a lot easier to manage and deal with. So if I go back to this asset with these three pieces here, if I look back at the level, I say, well, I've got too much of the same building height-wise. I want to make some variations in the height. You can go back here and set up a taller building, but keep it in pieces, right? So I can select all these pieces. I can move it up. I can duplicate some of these pieces here. I'll duplicate these two. Let's see, get these two here and duplicate them. So I want to make a new variation of this building, right? A little taller. So what's nice is that you can create this kind of workflow that's a bit more modular, right? I'll take this one and make it a little different. So again, I'll export that one. btest2, and then import that. And I'm not going to bring over the LOD because I don't have any. I don't want to bring the materials over again because I already have them. So I'll just bring over the static mesh and combine, make sure they're all coming in combined. right, so anybody have any questions while I'm waiting here? Nothing? All right, cool. So I'm just going to bring this asset in, place it in a level. I've got my B test 2 here. There it is, a little taller. And I can drag that into the world here. Move it around, place it where I want. And just jump in the level real quick. So here I set up to use UT game. So recognize the object. So you obviously will hit the geometry with the decals. I can run around here and see all this stuff here. Now, also you can also set up your light map coordinates directly inside of Maya and bring those over as well. So you can either use light maps that are automatically generated, or you can generate your own. All right. So next, I want to actually populate this level a bit more with some cool, some additional assets. So I'm going to show you a bit of using animation and some skinning and stuff like that. So I'm going to go back. This time I'm going to go back into Max and show you the differences here. So I'm going to load up Max 2012. So in here, I'm actually going to set up a flag asset, and I'll show you. What I'm going to show you here is the difference between a static mesh and a skeletal mesh. And a flag is an interesting object because it's a static mesh with bones in it, so it makes it a skeletal mesh. And then you can actually do things to those bones by either hand animating them, or you can actually use the bone information to say, well, this is the area of the flag that's soft, and use cloth on it. So I'll show you how I can do a little bit of cloth dynamics on a skeletal mesh. So here I'm going to actually bring up a cool little flag here. I'm going to say open. Let's go to my test scene here. And I'll bring in a flag. So basically I got a very simple flag object here. And basically it's just the pole and the flag itself. The flag itself is a square polygon object, but it's mapped with an opacity map. And what I want to do is I want this flag to wave in the wind, so I'm going to want to put cloth dynamics on it. But the cloth system needs a skinned object, or a skeletal mesh, what UDK calls it, in order for it to do that. So in order to set up a skeletal mesh, you need to use bones and skin to set which parts are rigid and which parts are moving. So I'm going to create some bones here. So I'll create a bone from the bottom here. I'm going to say this is the flagpole, and I'm going to say the flag itself is the part that's going to be the part that I'm going to want to have that dynamic motion to it. So I've got this kind of bone going up, and I got a bone going across where I want the flag to be. So one's just identifying that this is the rigid part, and this is going to be the flag part. So if I go to the flag itself, I can go to the skin modifier and apply some skin to it. I'm going to say, well, which bones do I want to use? Let's see if I can get to it down here. Okay, I'm going to go to add. I'm going to add both the two bones in here. But you know what? To make it easier for me inside of Unreal Ed, I'm going to name these bones first, because I can. I'll name one to be rigid and one to be soft. Which part of the skin I want to be rigid and which part I want to be soft. So I'm going to turn off select children for a second here. And oops. Bring out the bone itself, and I'll call this rigid. And I call this bone soft, or I'll call it cloth. Might be even easier. Okay, and then I'll go back to the object itself, the flag, and add those two bones, both the rigid and the clock. Now I've got a third bone here. I just got to delete that one out. I've got this one on the end here. Just delete that. I don't need that. So now if I want to see how each one's applied, I can actually go here to the cloth version of it. And I'm going to go and select by vertices, select by element, and pick that whole base object. And just go to the weighting section here of skin modifier, and I can set that to be 1. So just make that whole flag piece to be completely bound to the cloth bone. Actually, it looks like I put it the wrong one, the cloth bone there. I'll show you that right. So now I've got the bone on the outside edge, the cloth bone, completely skinned up to the flag itself. So to test it out, let me just make sure I got the right one. Let's go to bones only here. Nope, got the wrong one. Okay, so let me just make sure. I named the bones here the wrong way, so let me just go back here and change the name. Rigid is cloth. And cloth is rigid. Okay. Now let's go change my cloth back to regular cloth, and then I'll go back to the object here and set it to be, all right, so I want the cloth to be only the outside edges there, so I'm going to only the flag piece, so I'll say edit envelope, select by element. I'll get this whole element and make that weight it to be 1. So I get just a complete weighting on it. And let's see here. I'm probably going to need to re-add these two just in case. Yeah, it's still showing the wrong order. Somehow I keep missing the order here. All right. Well, I'll just keep those names the way they are. It's fine. And I'll go back here and say edit envelope. Go back to my rigid bone here. And edit the envelope. Okay, good. 1. Let's see here. All right, I'm starting over here. For some reason I'm getting these two names are screwing me up here. All right, so I'm going to change the cloth to be rigid. Rigid to change my second bone to be cloth. I'm good. Now I'm going to add my skin again. Add my 2 bones. Okay. I got my cloth bone. Edit the envelope. Good. It looks good there. It's fine. Edit envelope. I'll select by element. So I'll make sure I'm on vertices here. Vertices. I got the whole object. I'll go to my weighting. Say weight 1. Let's see, I got the whole object here. And select by element. Maybe I'm getting the whole object here for a minute here. I'm trying to think for a second here. I'm getting the whole object. And cloth 1. I don't know why the wrong object is turning red. Well, let me just rotate this, make sure here. All right, well, it's the right one anyway, so that's good. So I got my object and the bones set up properly now. I'll probably just double check and get the pole set up properly too. So I'll go select the other bone here, edit envelope. Rigid, looks good. I'm going to select by the whole element. All right, looks good. All right, so that's good enough. So I'm going to go and say export. This whole object now is Fbx. I'm going to call it from my flag folder here. Oops. Let's see. I'll export this into my test files, flags, export, and I'll go flags 2 here. Okay, so now I'm going to export. What do I want to export this time? It's a skeletal mesh, so I don't need to really change anything here. I don't really have to export any animation because I didn't put any animation on it. I just made a static mesh with some bones in it, some skinning. I don't need to export the animation or anything like that because there is no animation on it, but it does have the bones. So I'll export this out and go back to the UDK. And now if I go to the UDK here, I'm going to say import that file. I'm going to go import the flag, and I'm going to bring over the flags too. I'll call it flags. And say OK. But next time when I bring it in, I'm going to bring it in as it comes over, automatically knows that it's got bones on it. So I change the import type to skeletal mesh right away. You can change this back to a static mesh, but it's set up to as a skeletal mesh. I'm going to bring over, combine the meshes so it just comes over as one mesh. I'm going to import materials and textures and say OK. So I'm going to bring over the flag object. I should bring over pretty quickly, so I brought over the materials. It brought over the object. And now you'll notice that when you bring the object in, it's going to come up as a different kind of editor than what you were looking at before. It looks like it's a skeletal mesh editor. It calls it an animation set editor, but you can't actually do anything with the animation set really in here. You can only preview animation sets, but it is actually a skeletal mesh, and it brings up the anim set editor. Now, if you look at the asset itself, there's an option here on the top here to look at the object itself and any of its bones. So I can go look at the bone names, and you'll see there's the rigid bone and then the cloth bone. So it actually brings over the bone objects so you can see the bones on the objects themselves. Now, if this object is, since it's going to be, I want it to be animated, if I place it around now, it's not really going to do much. It's going to look like a static mesh. But I want to apply things as skinning and cloth to it. That might be a little funny because I didn't get in there in detail and really do any of the weighting up the top of this pole, so I might make the pole a little floppy, but you'll get the idea from it. So I'm going to go here to the object itself here and set that I want to use cloth bones. So I'm going to say the cloth bone is going to be the cloth part, the cloth of the bone. I'm going to turn on things such as I want to turn on advanced skinning here, or CPU skinning. So I'm just go here and say enable cloth dampening. No, I'm going to leave that alone. Do I want to have any stretching? No. I'm good there. Any pressure? No, looks good. So back at the top here, you're going to want to turn on force CPU skinning. So it's going to use the CPU to do the skinning itself. And I'm going to want to set some wind for this cloth. So I'm going to go to the cloth itself here and set where is the wind coming from. So if I look at the object, once they place it, I can set some wind parameters to it. So I've got my basic parameters set up for the cloth. I'm going to go here and place this asset. Scale mesh, add skeletal mesh flags. So I've got my flag asset here. Now notice that I can only see the flag from one side. So I want to go to the material and just make sure that's a double-sided material. So if I go back into the material part of this flag, I can just go in here and make sure that it's a double-sided material. So if I click on the material itself and then go to double-sided, so two-sided, and accept that change. So this will make sure that it's a double-sided material when I'm looking at it. So now I've got my asset here with the, I can look at the flag on both sides. Yep, that's good. Now if I start up, it should be just sitting still. Let me take a look. It might drop down, but let's take a look. So it's not doing anything yet. It's a regular skeletal mesh. Doesn't really have anything on it yet. So I'm going to set some properties on this object now. I want to set the static mesh actor, or skeletal mesh actor, to have some wind on it. So if I go to the cloth section, I can say enable cloth simulation on this object. I want to cloth awake on startup. It's fine. So as soon as it starts up the level, I want to make sure that it's running. And wind. I want to give it some X, Y, and Z wind to this object. So I'm just going to give about 100 units in X and Y of wind. And now if I go back to play, I should start to see something here. There it goes. I've got some bad skinning on that, that's for sure. All right, so the skinning came up, but it's starting to wave in the air there just a little bit. So, and since I got the, I probably didn't bind the rigid part of the flag, so it's just dropping the whole cloth through the ground because I didn't lock up the last bits. All right, well, instead of going in there and bringing that one back in, I'm just going to bring in one that I properly skinned here. Let's say OK. and bring over this flag here. Drop the material on it. This one I just spent a little more time skinning it. And I'll go and set those properties up again. Make sure that it's got cloth on it, enable cloth startup. So enable cloth simulation, start it up when it starts. Make sure that this was two-sided. Yep, that was two-sided. It's good. And I'm going to go and just force it to be CPU-based skinning in this case. So I'm good there. And make sure my cloth bone is set to cloth. I think this one, make sure the bone name is right. This one's solid and soft. So I was going to call it soft. And let's see, probably, did I set the wind? Well, let's just take a look. So there you go. So now I've got my the flag here with rigid, the end of the cloth is set on rigid bones, so it will actually fall and stay locked on. So you got to make sure you lock the vertices. So now if I go back to the Skeletal Mesh actor and go here to the wind, I can set to be 100 units, X and Y, and that'll give me a little bit more, get a little more wind dynamics. So now I've got a little more wind blowing on this thing. That's pretty cool. You can set up pretty quickly, simple object, add some bones to it, turn on cloth simulation, and you can see cloth running through the object pretty quick. So it's just adding a little more life to the scene. All right, so I got about 20 minutes left. I'm trying to think, might as well show something a little cool here. I was going to bring over just to do an animated object, but I think I'm going to do something a little more advanced. I'm going to show a little bit of some of the stuff I'm showing tomorrow, but I'm going to show a vehicle. I can actually bring something, a more complicated object into the game. So here I'm going to bring over a vehicle into the game. It's going to show a little bit of scripting and a little bit of skeletal mesh. So I'm going to do it pretty quick. It's only got 20 minutes, but you'll get the idea. So now I've got this kind of doom buggy that I want to bring into the game. It's pretty cool. I want to set up, how do I get this object into the game and drivable, right? It's a pretty big process because it's not only just a skeletal mesh with bones for the tires and stuff, but it's also going to be, the wheels got to turn, they got to turn with the driving, they got to have suspension, it's got to have a lot of stuff. And I've only got just this basic object real quick. So I'm going to do this as quickly as I can. But basically, I'm going to go here and start from a dummy object. So first I need to set up what's the root of this object. So I'm going to create a dummy called root. This is kind of be the center of this object. And I'm going to place it up off the ground here in kind of the center of the vehicle. Then I want the wheels to turn. So I know I need bones for those wheels in order for those wheels to turn. Right? I'm going to need to set up skinning. So that's kind of how vehicles and weapons and characters work. They're all skeletal meshes with bones. And then you drive the bones themselves through an animation tree. That's kind of like the main way you really drive animated objects, especially like a vehicle or a weapon or a character. They're all very much the same way. So next thing I need to do is create bones for the actual wheels themselves. The nice thing is when I set this up, I created the wheel as separate from the actual vehicle itself, because the skinning will actually tie it all back together as one object. So I can keep all these objects as different pieces. It allows me to be more accurate, and you'll see what I mean. So I want to set up a bone here for this tire in the front. I'm going to call it front left tire. Okay, and then I'm going to set up another one here. Just going to duplicate this one. I'll call this front right tire. So I'm just setting up the bones for this thing. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the back. Back right tire. And I'll set up another one here for the other side. Back left tire. So I'm just getting some good names for it. An important thing with skeletal mesh is everything has got to be linked to some root. Otherwise, it doesn't get imported properly into the engine. So it's important that they're all linked in some way. So I'm just grab this bone here. So now I've got my wheel bones set up. So now I want to line them with the tires. So I'm going to go and say all align this. Oops. I'm going to align this with my tire. So I'll say yes, use the center points of that tire. Center, X, Y, Z. It looks like, is it there? Let's see, position X, Y, Z. Yep, I got it. So then I'm going to go to this one too, do the same thing. Align with this tire. Okay. This one. Align with this tire. So it gets the bone centered exactly with those tires. So now I've got the bones in the right spot. Now I need to link them all together to the root to keep them all into one skeleton. So I'm going to just go to helpers here and just link these all together. So I'm going to link this to this root, this to the root, this to the root, and this to the root. Okay, so now I've got all my bones set up. Now I need to skin the object. So I can go to the back to the object itself, add a skinning modifier to it, and say add. So I'm going to go add all my bones here. So I'm going to add all my, let's see, I'm going to add my root and all the tires. So I'm going to go get them all. Actually, no, I just want the root in this case because I just got I'm only doing the body right now. So I'm going to select the root of the main body. So this is the main body of the vehicle attached to the main root of the bone. And then for each tire, I'm going to add the skinning. Now you can do it either way. You can actually have it all one mesh and have one skinning modifier and attach it to each bone, or you can have each object separated and have each of its own skinning. It just makes this a lot easier for me, I think, to manage when I do it this way. So this is the front left tire. So I'm going to go front left tire for that one, and go to this object, skin this one. And I'll do the front right tire for that. Same thing for this one. Skin it. And add the back right tire. If I can get this done, I think it'll be the fastest I've ever made a vehicle here. If you got a vehicle in the game, it should be good. And back left tire. Okay, so now I should have it in the point where if I move this object, the whole thing moves. Oh, I'm missing one. So good, I got this one tire in the front. Here it's not really attached to anything. So I'll just add that to the root bone. Oops. And I'll add this to the root. Okay. So now if I move it, I should be able to grab everything's moving at once. So good, I got it in here. I'm all skinned up, ready to go. So I'm going to export this now as, let's see, on my buggy. And I'll export it as, let's call it MIGS buggy. Okay, and save that. So now, though, again, I want to, all the settings pretty much going to leave alone because I don't really have an animation on it. It's really just getting the geometry out. So default settings are really good. I want to use my smoothing groups. Sometimes you want to use smoothing groups or not based off the normal maps because smoothing groups and normal maps can conflict based on the look you want. So in this case, I want the smoothing group because it's all made out of tubes, and I want to keep that smoothing across. So I'm going to export that out, and I go back to my UDK here. And I'm going to bring the vehicle in. So now this is going to bring in as just a pretty much regular old skeletal mesh. So you're going to have to do some back-end work to actually tie the scripting to this actual object to do something. So first I need to make a package that my scripting is going to reference. So I'm going to import this now as import as a skeletal mesh just to have a reference point. So I'm going to bring in this buggy, and I export it as MIGS buggy. So I'll do that. And yes, I want it as a skeletal mesh. No animations. Nope. I want to combine everything together. That's fine. I want to import materials and textures. Yep, that's good too. And I'll call this MIGS buggy. Now let's call this buggy. It looks like there's already one, so I'll call it something different. MIGS buggy 2. Okay to all. So this will take a minute because it's going to actually bring over a bunch of textures for it, the skeletal mesh for the object, and set it all up for me before I go in here. So to make a vehicle, it's actually set up, it's a bunch of different pieces that make up a vehicle. you've got your skeletal mesh, which is the buggy itself, and you got the materials, of course, to that. But then the actual, for the buggy to move or do things, you have to set up an animation tree, which defines the bones that you want to be wheels. Because it doesn't know. You can put a skeletal mesh on this vehicle. It doesn't know what's a wheel, what's just an animated object, what do you want to do. So we're going to do an animation tree for this. And lastly, we want to set up, well, how does the physics going to interact with this? So we're going to create a physics asset. So I'm going to create those next two things real quick. So now I got my buggy, and here it is. It's pretty cool. It's got my textures brought in, mesh is all brought in. My bones came over, all the right names, front left tire, root, it all looks good. So I look in good shape there. It came in with a rotated, so I'm just going to zero out that rotation. So it's got zero rotation on it. So now the next thing I do, I've got my package here. That's all I have is this skeletal mesh. I need to create a physics asset for it. So I'm going to create a new physics asset. So by right-clicking on the skeletal mesh and saying new physics asset, it will set up a new object called buggy_physics. And this is just to set up for a vehicle, how is it going to collide with other objects. So it comes out with just bounding boxes around the objects. And basically for vehicles, there's two types of collisions that happen. You've got a mesh that's around the vehicle that collides from vehicles to buildings, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to terrain. It will use this physics asset. But then you can actually use the per polygon collision for any bullets and things like that. So you don't have to worry about making a mesh that's perfect for all the holes and stuff like that. It'll actually use the mesh itself as the collision for bullets and stuff like that. But also it's set up boxes for the wheels themselves. I don't want that because the thing's going to drive like with boxes. I don't want that. You can create spheres, but realistically, the physics system drives the wheels. So the physics system knows that when I tell it it's a wheel, you can set what the radius is, and it'll actually use that for collision. It won't use the collision mesh, and it'll use its own physics system for that. So I'm going to go delete these bounding boxes for the wheels. I don't want those. So I can just select on them. Yep, I want to delete that one. I want to delete that one. Get rid of these things. Okay, good, good, good. And I've got a pretty decent scale. I don't want it to hit the ground when I'm driving, so I'm going to raise that up a bit. And I'm going to scale in a little bit here. That's good. So now I've got a basic collision mesh. And you can apply to physical material. That means when I shoot it with a bullet, what kind of material is it? Is it made out of metal or rubber? Or what kind of, am I going to get sparks? Or am I going to get like boop, 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 some rubbery sounds to it? So I can put a physical material to it. But I'll just leave the default setting there for now. So now I've got my physical asset. I need to set what's the wheel. So I'm going to go here and say create a new animation tree. So I'll say new animation tree, and I'll call it buggy anim tree. Okay. So basically an animation tree is a way to get to each of the bones of a specific object and apply controllers to them, things that can drive that bone, rotate it, move it, do tons of pretty cool functions in here. So one, I don't see anything in here in this animation tree. There's no object. I got an animation tree. It's got nothing on it. So I need to first pick the mesh that I want to do this to. So I can go to preview mesh here, add a new preview mesh, and tell this is going to be called I can just leave it blank. It's just if you want to name it. But the mesh I want to use is going to be this buggy. So I'm going to select on the buggy, go back to this tree, and say set that. Oops, can't get down there. The resolution is so low. Boom. So now I got my buggy loaded into the animation tree. But now I need to get to the bones. So this animation tree, right now I can only get to the whole thing as a whole, or if I want to, I can actually get to each bone. So I can say add new scale control. I'm going to say the back tire. I want to get to the front right tire. I want to get to the, each of the tires basically. Because I want to drive them one by physics as an engine and one by turning, like steering wheels. So here I've got the access to each of the bones. Then you can set up controller nodes, all kinds of control nodes, either like rotate by speed, rotate by tilting, rotate by, blend by on a hoverboard. There's all kinds of different nodes you get access to drive a bone. And in the script, I'm going to tell the script that it's a wheel, and the physics system will say, okay, I'm a wheel. You got a wheel. What's the name of the node you want me to control? So I'm going to say, well, I'm going to tell front left tire is the node I'm trying to drive. Physics will send parameters to that bone and say, spin me because I'm touching the ground, right? So the physics system knows that there's this radius in the world. You're going to set where this wheel is. So I'm going to tell it basically in the script that this bone is a wheel. So it knows that in that area there's a radius of a bone. And as it's running over things, it's going to be sending back spin, and it's going to be sending back colliding with things. And then you can, in here you say, well, which bone am I driving? I can drive any bone with it. I can drive the guy bouncing around because he's running over tires. I'm running over terrain. Or I can drive the actual wheel spinning, or I can drive it to any bone I want. Yeah? Yeah, so you'd have all the little, wheels. They could be, you can have like the 2 wheels in the tank that are actually the ones that are hitting the ground. And then the individual wheels will drive from that. And the tread itself, I'm pretty sure they have a, well, the way we would probably do it if it didn't have a bone here for now, they have what's called a parameter system. So, for example, I said probably the best example is there's an engine RPM, okay, parameter. So anything you build inside the scripting, you can build a parameter, a particle parameter, a sound parameter, and it really you can just send it a number. Right? You can send it a float, for example. Like so, I can set up a parameter called by speed. I want to update some parameter, a number. And that parameter can be used in all kinds of places. It can be used in the materials editor. It can be used in on these animation nodes. It can be used in sounds. It can be used in particles. So, for example, there's dust on these wheels, and because the wheel is spinning, it's gonna turn up the spawn rate on the dust on the particle emitter. The emitter is always there. But if it's got no number, it's got no particles spitting from it. So as the engine goes faster, it's going to turn on more spawning, and it makes dust, right? And it also has like a parameters in there for like is it contact in the ground. So for the tank tread, you put a texture. One way is put a texture on the tread itself. Put a texture panner on it. So you actually pan the wheel tread based off the speed of the vehicle. So then you start getting the treads to start moving. You can set up a bunch of little wheels that are invisible that drive bones, so the track actually goes over things. So you have a texture panel that's moving the texture, and you have bones that are actually driving the forming part of the bottom. So that's my quick thought of how I'd potentially do it, right? But that would be probably a good way. So now I've got my skeletal mesh up here with my animation nodes. I'm going to create a new skeletal control, and I'm going to go in here and add a wheel one here. So I think there's one in here called wheel, okay? So this node is from the physics system. It's going to drive this node, and I can tell this wheel that this bone is a wheel. So it doesn't really know it's a wheel, but I'm telling it that this animation node is going to drive this bone. So I'm going to say, well, what is that? That's the back left tire. So I'm going to go in here and say, well, how do I want this to rotate? So I just want to adjust it, see what it's going to look like. So I can zoom in here, look at the wheel itself, and say I want the wheel roll to be really fast. So now if I move this little bar here, it's got a cool little previewer. You can see what's going to happen with that wheel. So I can see right away that it's not the right, axis. Right? So I can go here and set that that's the y-axis I want it to spin on. Okay, now that's going to drive the bone to that wheel, and it's spinning it. So then I need to tell it that what parameter, what controller in the engine is going to spin me. Right? So I got to give it a name that my script is going to send a parameter to. So I'm going to call it, this one is called the back left tire. So back left tire, CONT. And I got to move fast because I got 3 minutes left. All right, so I'm going to go 3 times, boom, 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 4 times here. I'm going to create this skeletal control. And now I've got my back left tire, all 4 tires here. And I was going to name them right. So this one's going to be front right tire, or front left tire. This one's going to be front left tire. Oh, I already got that one. So this is going to be, I've got back left, front left, back right. And another back left, front right, I mean. Okay, so now I've got my each of my tires set up. So I've got my back left tire, boom. My front left tire is going here. My back right tire is there. and my front right tire is up there. So now I've got each of my nodes tied up. So I want to make sure my steering is working right too. So I'll just go to my front left tire here and change my steering, give it some steering there. All right, good, my tire is steering in the right direction, right? So I can just quickly test that my tire is spinning in the right direction. So now I've got all the pieces in here to have a vehicle that can drive. But before I go into the scripting and set this thing up, I want to just set a couple more things. Another couple of things you also have with a skeletal mesh is, now I've got my bones on the object, and I've got skidding all set up, and my animation tree, and I'm all good. Now I need to set up where the guy's going to sit. Where is he sitting here? Where does smoke come from? Where does particles attach to? I don't want to go back all the way back to Maya and set up my bones for all that kind of stuff, right? Because I'm not always sure where it's going to be, and I want to be able to dynamically adjust it inside of right inside here. So you can set up what's called sockets. So sockets are ways to quickly add an offset to an existing bone and add a new item to it. So I'm going to add where the seat's going to be and where my view is going to be to this object. So I'm going to say, well, a new socket is going to be based off of the root, and it's going to be called the seats. And I'll make I'll tell it, well, the seat is over here, basically over where he's sitting right there. All right, and then I'm going to create another socket called, off the root bone again, called the driver view socket, I believe it's called. And this is where I'm going to be looking. And I'll adjust this once I get into the engine, once I get into the game. So I kind of set where my view is going to be for that object. So now I am good. I'm going to save this package. Let's see, save, I'm good. I'll call this MIGS Buggy 2, sure. I'm going to create it in the content folder here under vehicles. Okay. And that's where the fun begins. So now I've got my package, I've got my whole vehicle set up, and now I'm going to jump into the actual scripting and link it all up. Tell it this is the name of my skeletal mesh, this is the name of my physics asset, this is the name of my animation tree, and get it all signed up. Any questions so far while saving? All right, like speed vehicling instead of speed dating. All right, so now I've got it all saved up. I'm going to quit out of here, close down the unrelated for a second, go into my source, and I'm actually going to go into the script. I've set up some scripts here for the vehicle itself, but basically there's the vehicle itself. This is all the vehicle code. And I copied this basically from the UT Scorpion because UDK comes with Unreal Tournament. So I took the Scorpion vehicle, copied it over, named some things the way I want to name them, make some sounds, and hooked them all up, and made a quick script here for it. So in here, I just want to set that tied to my new objects. So if I go down to the default properties where you kind of set what the mesh is, I'm just going to go down to the wheels. Yep, the wheel names are back left tire, front right tire, that looks all good. But here's my skeletal mesh. It says MIGS Buggy. I think I called it MIGS Buggy 2. So I'll call it MIGS Buggy 2. And I'll unrem them. So they're there. So basically I'm assigning my skeletal mesh, assigning my animation tree, and assigning that physics asset that we made for all three of these pieces. And I'm going to turn on the rigid body. And let's see, my seat socket is seats. That was right. So I'm all good. So I'm going to save this. So there's two pieces. There's the actual buggy itself, and then there's a vehicle factory. That's actually how the vehicle gets spawned. So there's the vehicle, and then there's a factory which spawns it. That's how it works. All right, so I'm going to actually launch this now. And now it's going to want to say, hey, the scripts have changed. You want to rebuild them? Yep. So it's going to rebuild the script for the editor. No errors. Lucky me. I'm good. And I launch the editor and see if my vehicle drives. The cool thing is now it's all set up. I can tweak fast because now everything is connected. I've got my animation tree. I've got my scripting set up. I can go drive some parameters. So first I'll just drive it in. I'll drop it into this level quickly and then see if it works, and then we can bring it to another level. So now if I go to vehicles, I'll see my new factory here called Buggy. MIGS Buggy, actually. Drag it over. And I got nothing showing. So that means that something wasn't named right. So MIGS Vehicle Factory. Let me just take a check here. Make sure my buggy is in here. Vehicles MIGS Buggy 2, and I named it MIGS Buggy 2, right? I've got my Skeletal Mesh here called Buggy. So I'm going to just verify that everything is right here. Let me just take a look. Let me just double check by spawning, just make sure it's not there. I don't think it is. Oh, it is there. Okay. So, oh, I know I didn't do. The factory itself has there's the actual vehicle that you created, and then there's a factory which says, you know, I need a plate. Where is it going to spawn? In that file, you actually have to set the skeletal mesh as the visual representation when you're laying it out. So you can actually have a visual representation that's one thing, and what's spawned is another. And the reason why is because the vehicle factory can do a lot of things. It can spawn based off, oh, I own this point, I own this area, spawn this kind of vehicle with the same factory. So you can have a factory that shows different vehicles, but based on who owns that point, spawn a jet, spawn a tank, spawn this vehicle, good guy vehicle, spawn a bad guy vehicle. That's why they do that. That's one of the reasons why they do it. So now I've got my vehicle in here, but instead I want to run around as a UT character here, so I'm going to change my world properties of this level and change it to be a UT game for the plane editor. Also, I don't know if can I have audio on this laptop? There you go. So now I've got my vehicle and get in it. All right, so that means my socket's not right because I can't see. Right? So I'm going to get out. So I'm going to go and change my socket. Now the cool thing is I'm not going to close the game. I'm just going to leave it open. And I can go to the socket and look at the socket itself I use for the camera. It's pretty far forward. It might be just too far forward. Driver view socket. And let's make sure that was the name of the socket in the script. So I'm just going to go here and look at that class real quick again. And just make sure if I go back down to the socket of that seat socket is one driver seat socket. I don't think that's what I called it, right? I think I called it something else. Actually, here it is. Driver seat socket. Okay, so I go back to this, back to the editor. I'll go to my socket manager, and I'm just missing a box here. Here it is. Driver seat socket. So I'll say new socket, root, driver seat socket. All right, and then I'll move this back here, move it up. Now I might be able to do this right away. There we go. So now I'm actually getting a better view. And now I can go back here and kind of tweak this view a little bit. Down, maybe a little forward. So now it's a little down and forward. Okay, it's better. And now my guy is like right on top of me. That's where he's sitting. So I'm going to move this other seat back. Just kind of get this guy out of my way. Looks like I got my tires turning. Alright, looks like I've got my vehicle in here and driving around. So now I'm going to just load them into a much more interesting level, and then I will be done here. Actually, I want to save that. Oh, that's all right, I'm good. Let's give it a little more interesting terrain and drive over, give you an idea what you can do. So this is just the buggy itself, but I spent some more time on it, add some guns, other seats, all kinds of fun stuff to the vehicle. So I'm going to load it up into another level here. And while this is loading, I will, have any questions while I'm loading this up? Oh, loaded up faster than I thought.
You are on red.
So I'm going to just run over this vehicle here now. I've got the buggy in here. And it's got basically, you can see a character in there, I've got a gun on top. Different you have different sockets for different cameras. You know, a side profile here. And of course, you get a little minigun on top of it. So you can kind of set up a whole vehicle inside of Maya or Max and bring it into Unreal. All right. Well, that's it for today. Tomorrow I'll go into weapons and characters and some more good stuff like that.